that the charity Mermaids is to be investigated by the Charity Commission. The charity Mermaids, which you will know, some of you will know if you don't, the transgender youth support charity, is being looked at. This is after an undercover investigation by the Telegraph newspaper claiming that Mermaids is supplying breast binders to children without parental consent. These are devices used to bind up the breasts in order to give the appearance of a flatter chest. Lauren Moss is the BBC's LGBT and identity correspondent and has been following this story. Lauren, remind us about Mermaids and what they were set up to do.
Morning, Emma. Well, Mermaids was formed in 1995, and like you say, they're a charity that supports young transgender people or gender diverse children up to the age of 25. And they say that they don't give health care advice as such. They signpost to what's available. They give guidelines. They run forums and helpline services and community groups. And they've been doing that since around about 1995. It was subject to the focus of a series of pieces like you were mentioning there in the Daily Telegraph last week.
And why now under investigation by the Charity Commission?
Well, it mainly centres around what you were just saying around chest binders and breast binding devices. Now, one of these pieces in the Daily Telegraph investigation last week said that binders have been supplied to children without parental permission. And they are essentially like what you just said. They may be worn by somebody who has gender dysphoria. That's defined by the NHS as a sense of unease experienced by what's called a mismatch between biological sex and gender identity. And there are specifically designed devices for this. For chest binding, or some people may choose to make their own from things like sports bras and tape and bandages, designed to be worn for a limited number of hours a day, but usually, like you say, to disguise breasts or give a more traditionally masculine appearance under clothes. And the Charity Commission has said that following this article, this investigation in the Telegraph, that they received a number of complaints in relation to safeguarding at Mermaids. And so it's opened what's called a regulatory compliance case. And it's written to the trustees of the charity about that. Now, last week, Mermaids, last Friday night, released a strongly worded statement about all of this, saying that they were in the midst of a targeted and cynical attack to discredit the charity, and that they take a harm reduction approach in relation to binders. And they say it's always safety advice given, and that's preferable to the likely alternative of unsafe practices around binding as well. But they are in contact with the Charity Commission, and trustees, I think, have a week or so to respond.
So in terms of what will happen next, what could happen?
Well, this regulatory compliance case is effectively a fact-finding investigation. And what the Charity Commission will do is try and establish exactly what has gone on here, what safeguarding process were in place and what was followed. So the trustees of Mermaids have been written to. The Charity Commission will then assess what happens next. The regulatory compliance case doesn't mean that there has necessarily been any wrongdoing. It could result in nothing at all. It could result in advice given to the charity working closer together, or it could be escalated to what's called a statutory inquiry. And that's where the Commission has wider powers over the charity. And, for context, the Commission regulates 170,000 charities in England and Wales. They concluded around 5,500 of these regulatory compliance cases each year over the last couple of years. And from those, around 60 statutory inquiries were opened. So what the Commission will do is look into the safeguarding processes. It won't be making a ruling on chest binders generally, on the medical pros and cons of those. It will centre around the safeguarding practices at Mermaids.
And that means, about parental consent. Is that when you talk about the safeguarding practices?
Sorry, say that again, Emma?
Does that mean about parental consent, whether these binders have been sent without it?
Yeah, I think that will form part of it. I mean, as Mermaids would say, that they would rather give advice and guidance around chest binders if there was a parent involved that wasn't supporting the young person. They would rather give them that advice than that young person potentially turning to other methods for chest binding, which may be more potentially harmful, which has been raised as well. That they would rather do that in a way that then alleviates some of the anxiety and distress experienced by those that have gender dysphoria. Because of all the elements that will be looked into. Yeah,
and this is a wider context. We know the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic is going to close, and we also know that there is a change afoot in how children are being treated.
Yeah, I think this is sort of the latest really in the focus around care for gender identity services involving young people, and the healthcare and services that are there for them. Like you mentioned, the Tavistock there in July, it was announced that the Tavistock, which was the only specific gender identity services centre for young people, is to close in favour of regional centres and hubs which will be opened up around England, providing sort of a more inclusive, holistic care and looking around mental health, providing more support. There are incredibly long waiting lists that have increased exponentially over the last 5 years or so. So this is sort of the latest really in the focus on safeguarding and care for young people and the services and support that are available to them. But like I say, Mermaids have a couple of weeks or so to respond, and then we'll find out really if there will be any outcome from this latest report and investigation.
And just staying with Mermaids, Mermaids have been working on a tribunal because another charity, the LGB Alliance, have been taken to a tribunal by Mermaids this month. And last, the LGB Alliance was set up in 2019 when, in its own words, it became clear that same-sex attracted people no longer had an organisation dedicated to meeting their needs or protecting their hard-won rights. This was after the organisation Stonewall began campaigning for transgender rights in 2015. High-profile supporters of the LGB Alliance include Professor Kathleen Stock. So, Lauren, to come to you, because I know you've been following this as well, why is the LGB Alliance's charitable status being appealed by Mermaids? A totally separate case.
Yeah, like you say, it's not directly linked to anything at all we've just been discussing then, although a couple of the same players mentioned. But this is the first time that I understand a tribunal has happened where a charity has sought to appeal the status of another charity. So Mermaids is appealing the Charity Commission's decision to make the LGB Alliance a charity in 2020. Now, that case was largely heard last month and will return next month for closing arguments. Now, Mermaids argues that the LGB Alliance has what was described in the court documents as an anti-trans focus. It seeks, they say, to obstruct or impede Mermaids' work and others that support transgender people while not fulfilling the aims that it's pledging to do, supporting people who are lesbian, gay and bisexual. Now, the LGB Alliance founders say, like you just mentioned, that they set up their charity to represent and help lesbian, gay and bisexual people after other charities started prioritising gender over sex. And they say that sex is immutable, it cannot be changed. And there were some very powerful things discussed in the hearing last month, where one of the co-founders said that homophobia was at the heart of gender identity theory, which is obviously something that Mermaids and other charities, including Stonewall, would disagree with. And really, the Mermaids are questioning whether the LGB Alliance meets the legal tests for charitable status. But it isn't simply enough for Mermaids not to agree with what the LGB Alliance stands for, because LGB Alliance insists that they are not anti-trans, that they want to exist essentially to support LGBT people, and that they are supportive of trans rights, which of course Mermaids very strongly disagrees with. But what the judges will have to decide is whether, firstly, Mermaids have the legal standing to bring this case in the first place. Just disagreeing on the 2 points isn't enough. They have to prove that they've been impacted. And then the Charity Commission will be looking at also whether LGB Alliance does meet that legal standing and what the purposes and public benefit are of LGB Alliance being a charity. And that will be decided in the next coming months after closing arguments next month.
So when will we learn the outcome?
Well, how long is a piece of string? We've seen with some of these cases in the past that they can take many weeks, few months even. Okay. Closing arguments will be next month, and then the decisions will be made sometime after that in the coming weeks or months.
Well, I'm sure we will talk again, if not before. Lauren Moss, thank you for an update on both of those stories. The BBC's LGBT and identity correspondent there.